All right, welcome back. So now that we've gone over our similarities and we understand that it's important to keep that in mind whenever we're having, especially when we're having conflicts and disagreements with others, now let's appreciate our differences. The point of this is to recognize that we are different for various reasons and to be able to approach others in a more understanding and empathetic way. Hopefully, with the intent that it allows us to cooperate more effectively. So the first part is nature. Now, there are a lot of ways that people have come up with to basically identify and categorize each other based on personality. And you have astrology, you have enneagrams, there's the Myers-Briggs, there's a lot of different personality assessments and categories. And the point being that we are all different in various ways, and a lot of that is genetic, based on the way that we are inherently. Of course, it's also affected by nurture and our environment and upbringing, and we'll go into that separately. But just from the very fact when we're born, we have different genetic predispositions from a personality standpoint. And the one that I like to use for this purpose is the Ocean, the Big Five personality model, which I'll get into. But the point is that we have evolved to be different. And that is because there's no single optimal way to perceiving our world. Reality is too chaotic, there's too many variables, there's an infinite number of stimuli and factors that we need to account for. And a lot of our problems are unpredictable. And so we have evolved to literally perceive the world differently, because our personalities, what they do is they direct our limited cognitive resources, and they prime our perceptual system to pay attention to and process specific stimuli. So we actually experience the world differently than people who have a different personality. And ideally, again, if we're able to cooperate, we can feed off each other and use our varying personalities to our collective advantage. As Anais Nin says, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And that begins with our personality. Personality differences are genetically underpinned, they cannot be easily changed, they're fairly stable over time, and is one of the biggest contributors to diversity among people. And so, although we have personality-based proclivity although a lot of this is nature, of course, again, our nurture and our environment, upbringing can help shape and mold personalities. But at the core of it, we are who we are, and that remains fairly stable over time. So why is this important? Why is it important to understand personality differences? It's important because it helps us interact more harmoniously with others and increases our genuine tolerance for differences. Because on one level, when any of us is having a significant disagreement with someone else, what might at first seem like something that we're unable to figure out eventually becomes more understandable once we realize that we are genetically programmed, evolutionarily wired to be different in this way. And it is only by having a dialogue and being able to communicate and work things out with this individual or these groups of individuals that we're able to progress as a species. And this is for our collective benefit. And understanding personality, especially our own, also helps us identify our place in the world, to figure out what kind of work, what kind of relationships we want. that's suitable for ourselves. So as I mentioned, the model that I like to use is the 5-factor model. The reason for that is that it's scientific in its approach. It's been shown to be reliable across different cultures, has broad applications, and also accounts for other psychological concepts. The other thing is that people who have come up with this model have found that the 5 traits vary quite independently, and people exist on a scale for each of the 5 qualities. And so there are many combinations of scores that are possible to form the vast array of personalities that exist. And the five factors, I'll get into it here shortly. So I won't go into too much detail because you can see it on the slides. The first is openness. And each trait is kind of subdivided into 2 others. So for example, openness is composed of openness and intellect, which is further broken down into creativity and interest in aesthetics. Then you have intellect, which is associated with intelligence, like your IQ, your mental processing speed basically, and your interest in ideas, in reading difficult material, philosophical discussions, interest in solving complex problems, etc. So that's openness. Next you have conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is broken down into industriousness and orderliness. So industriousness is basically how hard you work, your work ethic. Again, this can be trained through culture, but a lot of it is also based on personality. And orderliness, which is basically liking things tidy in boxes, not messy, liking details, etc. Conscientiousness is also related to disgust sensitivity, which we evolved to be disgusted to things that could harm us and kill us, like parasites and pathogens. But we've also been able to direct that disgust towards other groups of people. And it's a technique that various leaders, like Hitler, have used to get their people to be repulsed by another type of category of people that leads to a lot of the genocide and killing that we observed in history. Again, there's strengths and weaknesses to all types of personality. And with regards to conscientiousness, it's great for implementation, but sometimes conscientious people can get too bogged down in the weeds and lose sight of the bigger vision. And so you need a little bit of both. You need conscientious people, but you also need people who are very open and creative and can see the bigger picture. Next, we have extroversion and neuroticism. So I've grouped these together because it's kind of the positive, negative duality that I talked about earlier with regards to emotion. So extroversion is this positive emotion, it's enthusiasm, it's assertiveness, spontaneous, fun-loving, sociable, talkative, a little bit impulsive, taking initiative. And whereas low in extroversion, it's introverted, reserved, you're quiet, you're aloof. And extroverted, you're enthusiastic, you love talking about yourself, you're very open, warming up quickly, emotionally expressive, having fun, as well as the opposite. And then assertive, take charge, have a strong personality, and you kind of influence others. With neuroticism, this is on the negative emotional spectrum, so this is separated into withdrawal and volatility. So withdrawal is kind of that freeze tendency of whether due to fear or anxiety, kind of stopping. This can be just a general feeling of depression, being a warrior, having a lot of fear, easily feeling threatened or discouraged or overwhelmed. And volatility is people who are kind of touchy and moody and hyper respond to quote unquote negative situations based on anger, frustration, or annoyance. And again, this is something that is personality based, it's genetically based, but it's also heavily affected by our upbringing and our conditioning. And so there's, again, pluses and minuses to both. For example, extroverted people, they might be more impulsive, they might care about the present more, so this can lead to maybe gambling problems, for example. Whereas people who are high in negative emotion, who have a lot of worry, a lot of fear, this can allow them to plan well for the future, but they can also have a tendency to basically postpone living because they're so afraid of dying. So again, what we want to find for each individual is what is authentically us, and what is the way of being that perfectly suits us. If we're naturally introverted, forcing ourselves to be hyper extroverted is just going to feel forced. It's not going to feel natural. It's not going to feel good. And some people are just worriers more than others, and it's okay to be that way. And it's important that we recognize that we're all different, and that there's no proper one way to be. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. That's why we evolved that way. For example, our ancestors, the ones who were risk takers, they're probably, higher the risk, higher the reward, but the chances of failing and dying are higher. Whereas the one who's paranoid, it might detract from their quality of life, but they might be more likely to survive because they're just afraid of everything. So they just are always careful of everything. But there's maybe no creativity there. So again, it's when we are able to work together and find out what works best for ourselves, as well as how to bring out the best in others and to help others realize that who they are is okay. And there's benefits, pluses and minuses to being either which way. Next, there's agreeableness. So this is the social aspect of personality, to figure out how to weigh our own interests with those of others. We have compassion, we have politeness. So I'll let you read through that. And again, there's advantages and disadvantages for both. So agreeableness, people who are high in agreeableness, they're able to cooperate, and it's necessary for building relationships, but they might have a difficulty to stand up for themselves, to voice their boundaries. This can turn into resentment or passive aggressiveness. Disagreeable people are maybe more likely to advocate for their own interests and are less likely to be used, but they can find it difficult to cooperate because they're always just concerned with what they want. So in terms of sex differences based on these personalities, so men and women are alike in many ways. Women score higher in agreeableness and neuroticism, so women tend to be more agreeable and a little bit more neurotic. And it's important to know that while average scores are fairly close, a lot of times the extremes are where we find the outliers. So the small differences can have large effects at the tail end of normal distributions. And so, one example that Jordan Peterson loves to use is that if you look at the average male and female and you ask who's more disagreeable, it might be fairly similar. But if you go to the tail end, almost all the most disagreeable people are men, and a lot of the violence is committed by men, and so there's a disproportionate number of men in prison, for example. And so it's important to realize that although men and women are similar in a lot of ways, the extremes cause a lot of the differences that we see in society. Furthermore, there's the greater male variability hypothesis, and it suggests that the distribution for traits among men is flatter than for women, so that women kind of more trend towards the average, whereas men are more extreme. And so again, even if the average is the same, the least intelligent people in the world are men, the most intelligent are also men, the least hardworking are men, the most intelligent are also men, for example. And so that's why you see a lot of these skews where men are at the extremes, both in success and in quote unquote failure. So, you know, a lot of the CEOs and politicians and high performing people are men, but there's also a lot of men, more men who are commit suicide, who are homeless, etc., etc. And there's also societal factors that play into that as well. So one of the big differences between man and woman is that men are interested in things, so tools, mechanical things, engineering, and women are interested in people, whether that's like nursing or teaching. They love to deal with people. And so because men and women don't differ that much in IQ or conscientiousness, it's these differences in interest that mediates the occupational choice between men and women. So that's kind of a quick summary of differences in personality. Jordan Peterson has a great course that goes much more in depth into these qualities. I just wanted to share it briefly just so you have some understanding of the fact that we have these differences in personality, that a lot of it's biological and there's no right or wrong. My personality isn't inherently better than anyone else's, nor is anyone else's better than mine. Just different ways to be, and we need all of it. We need all of the different personalities when we're able to work together to create a more functioning society. Because if everyone were like me, society would trend one way and it might not be the best way. And so we all are kind of like counterbalancing with one another.